Welcome to BookCast FM, bringing books to life one cast at a time. Today we're doing a deep dive into, well, really one of the most talked about, intellectually stimulating books from the last couple of decades, Freakonomics. That's by Stephen Levitt, the economist, and Stephen Dubner, the journalist.
Absolutely. And this book, it really shifted how a lot of people think about decisions. It's not your standard economics class, the supply and demand curves. It's more about taking the economic toolkit, thinking about incentives, using data rigorously, and applying it to, well, unexpected places, crime, parenting, even cheating.
Right. So our mission today is basically to pull out the core arguments, the things that make this book so provocative. We'll unpack, I think, 4 key themes: how incentives really drive us, why challenging conventional wisdom is so important, the power of data over just gut feelings, and this big idea of unintended consequences.
And maybe the single most important takeaway, the lens we really need to use here, is that quote from the book: morality represents the way we would like the world to work. Economics represents how it actually does work.
Yeah.
So the aim is to look past maybe our ideals, our feelings, and focus on what the data, the behavior, actually shows us.
Okay, let's get into it then. Starting with chapter 1. It asks this really weird question. What do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? Seems completely random, but the answer that the data reveals anyway is cheating. And it's driven by very specific incentives.
Yeah, it's quite a shocking way to start, isn't it? Levitt looked at standardized test results from Chicago public schools, and the teachers, they were under huge pressure. I mean, their jobs, school funding, sometimes it was all tied to getting higher scores. That's a massive incentive.
And they found these patterns that statistically just shouldn't happen.
Right.
The data left like a footprint. It wasn't just kids guessing randomly. Levitt's analysis flagged these weird sequences, like a really tough question, then a correct answer, and then suddenly a whole block of answers for that student were corrected. It strongly suggested the teacher went back and, filled in the bubbles.
Exactly. What you reward, you get. If the system incentivizes higher scores above all else, well, some people will find a way, even if it's dishonest. And they took that same logic, that same way of thinking, and applied it to sumo wrestling. A sport that's just steeped in tradition and honor.
Yeah, the match-fixing idea. They looked at wrestlers who were right on the edge, about to be demoted. Losing meant a big hit to their career, their income. And strangely, these wrestlers often managed to win against higher-ranked opponents who conveniently had already secured enough wins for that tournament.
So the incentive for the higher-ranked guy, maybe take a dive, lose intentionally, knowing they'd likely get a payback later when they needed it. It's a sort of unspoken exchange.
So cheating becomes this primordial economic act, as they put it, getting more for less. Even in that bagel example, Paul Feldman's honor system business, people mostly paid, right? Like 87, 89% honesty.
Right, which is pretty high, actually. But it wasn't perfect. And the data showed cheating went up in offices where maybe morale was low or there was a lot of stress. The environment mattered.
So it seems like dishonesty leaves this kind of measurable trace, whether you're a teacher, a sumo wrestler, or just, grabbing a bagel at work. Okay, so if incentives can drive cheating, what about when one side just knows more, when they control the information?
Well, that takes us right into the second big theme, information and power dynamics. And the chapter title is another grabber. How is the Ku Klux Klan like a group of real estate agents? The link here is something called information asymmetry.
Information asymmetry. That's basically when one person in a deal knows a lot more than the other person, right? And they can use that advantage. Like buying a used car, the seller knows all the little creaks and problems. You don't.
Exactly that. With the KKK back in the 40s, their power was built on secrecy. All those hidden codes, the rituals, keeping member names secret, that mystery was their leverage. But then this activist, Stetson Kennedy, he got hold of the secrets and just broadcast them, put them out there on the radio for everyone to hear.
Democratize the information.
Yes. And once the secrets were out, the mystery vanished. And so did a lot of their power. It just deflated.
Okay, so how does that connect to real estate agents? They seem pretty different.
Well, agents also operate with an information advantage compared to the average home seller or buyer. They know the market, the process, the pricing nuances. Now, legally, they're supposed to work for the client's best interest. But the data Levitt looked at suggests their incentives might push them differently. When agents sell their own houses, the data shows they tend to wait quite a bit longer and, on average, get a higher price. But when they sell your house, there's often this push for a quicker sale, maybe accepting a slightly lower offer. Why?
Let me guess. Commission.
Pretty much. The extra commission they'd get from holding out for a slightly higher price often isn't worth the extra time and effort for them. Their incentive is often to close the deal faster. So they use that information advantage, subtly perhaps, to serve their own agenda, getting that commission check sooner rather than later.
Wow. That makes you think. Experts using their knowledge for their own benefit. But the book also says things like the internet help, right? More transparency levels the field.
Okay, speaking of hidden incentives and maybe surprising economics, let's talk Chapter 3. Why do drug dealers still live with their moms? That challenges a big perception. Oh, definitely. The common image is, Scarface, piles of cash,
Yeah.
quick road to riches. But this sociologist, Sudhir Venkatesh, he did this incredible ethnographic study, actually got inside a Chicago drug gang and saw their financial books, the real number.
And the reality was different.
Very different. It turns out the gang structure is a lot like a standard corporation, weirdly enough. You've got the leaders at the top, the board of directors making huge amounts of money. But the guys actually selling on the street corner, the foot soldiers, they were making almost nothing, often less than $4 an hour.
Less than minimum wage. Seriously.
Yeah, less than working at McDonald's, basically. And think about the risk they're taking.
Astronomical risk.
Exactly. The book points out that back then, a street-level crack dealer actually had a higher chance of dying than someone on death row. So wait, terrible pay, poverty, incredibly high risk of death.
Why would anyone do that job?
And that's where the tournament model comes in, isn't it? It's like a lottery. They put up with the awful conditions, the danger, because there's this tiny, tiny chance. This dream of making it to the top, reaching those super lucrative leadership positions. The potential payoff is enormous, even if the odds are terrible.
So it's the allure of that jackpot, however unlikely, that keeps the whole system running at the bottom. It keeps people competing, despite the grim reality.
Yeah, it's kind of like harsh capitalism playing out in the shadows, which actually brings us to maybe the most famous and definitely the most controversial part of the book, Chapter 4, Where Have All the Criminals Gone?
Ah, yes, the crime drop. In the 80s, early 90s, all the experts were predicting this explosion of crime, these super predators.
Yeah.
But instead, crime rates, especially violent crime, just plummeted across the U.S. dramatically.
And Levitt and Dubner looked at all the usual explanations people gave, better policing strategies, more people in prison, a stronger economy, and basically said, nope, these don't fully explain it. The drop was too big, too sudden.
Right. They argued those factors played a role, but not the deciding role for such a massive turnaround. So they looked for something else, something bigger with a longer fuse. And that led them to look back about 20 years earlier to a huge societal shift.
Which was?
The nationwide legalization of abortion in 1973, following the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision.
Okay, this is the controversial part. Explain the connection they made.
Their argument, based purely on the data patterns, is this. Legal abortion meant fewer unwanted children were born in the years after 1973. And children born into situations where they are unwanted are, statistically speaking, much more likely to grow up in poverty, face instability, and ultimately be at higher risk for criminal behavior later in life.
So fast forward about 18, 20 years.
Exactly. By the early 1990s, that generation that would have been born into those higher risk circumstances but wasn't, would have been reaching their peak crime-prone years. Fewer potential criminals in that age group, the theory goes, led to a significant drop in crime.
And the proof they offered was in comparing states, right?
Yes, that's crucial. States like California and New York, which actually legalized abortion before the 1973 federal ruling, they saw their crime rates start to fall earlier than states that only legalized it after Roe v. Wade. The timing matched the hypothesis.
It's a really stark example of what you mentioned earlier, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
A policy decision with one goal having this massive unforeseen effect decades later, and it forces you to separate the moral arguments from just observing how economic and social forces play out.
Precisely. It goes back to that core idea. Economics describes how the world does work, not necessarily how we wish it would. It's about the data, not the desirability.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit from these huge societal trends to something more personal. Parenting. Chapter 5. What makes a perfect parent? Here, they really tackle the anxieties and maybe myths around modern parenting.
Yeah, they start by pointing out how irrational our fears often are. The classic example. Parents worry intensely about guns in the home. But statistically, for a young child, the family swimming pool is far more dangerous. But pools don't get the same scary media coverage, so our perception of risk is skewed.
It's about separating correlation from causation, isn't it? They looked at this big study, the early childhood longitudinal study. to see what parental factors actually correlate with kids doing well later on versus things parents do that might not matter as much as we think.
Right. And what did correlate strongly with positive outcomes for kids? Things like the parents being highly educated themselves, high socioeconomic status, having lots of books in the house, the mother being older, like over 30 when the child was born, things related to the parents' background and stability.
Okay, so those are the things that matter. What about the things that parents often stress about, the daily tactical stuff?
That's where it gets really interesting. Once you control for those background factors, the parents' education, income, etc., a lot of the things we obsess over didn't seem to make much difference statistically. Things like reading to your kid every single day, taking them to museums constantly, strictly limiting TV time, whether one parent stayed home or not, even things like spanking or family structure.
Wait, so reading to your kids doesn't matter. That seems counterintuitive.
Well, it's not that reading is bad, obviously. It's more that the type of parent who reads to their child every day is likely already educated, values learning, has books around. It's hard to disentangle the act of reading from the environment that happens in. The data suggests the environment, the parent's inherent traits and stability, are much stronger predictors than those specific daily activities.
So the big takeaway is it's less about the specific things you do as a parent and more about who you are, your background, your stability, your values.
That's the provocative conclusion, yeah. The who you are, education, socioeconomic stability seems to outweigh the what you do tactical parenting choices, at least in terms of long-term measurable outcomes for the kids.
That definitely challenges a lot of parenting advice books. And that idea flows kind of neatly into the last chapter, doesn't it? The one about baby names. Would a Roshonda by any other name smell as sweet?
Exactly. The question is, does the name you give your child actually shape their destiny? Does having a successful sounding name help them succeed? And the data, again, suggests probably not.
Names are more of a signal, right? They tell you about the parent.
Precisely. Names tend to correlate strongly with the parent's socioeconomic status, education level, race, and aspirations. A parent choosing the name winner versus loser, that tells you something about the parent, not the child's inherent potential. They mentioned that famous, almost unbelievable true story of two brothers actually named Winner and Loser Lane.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. And the outcomes were flipped, weren't they?
Completely. Loser Lane ended up becoming a respected police sergeant, a success story. Winner Lane, sadly, compiled a long criminal record. It's a perfect, if extreme, anecdote showing the label itself means very little compared to upbringing, choices, environment. The name is a reflection, not a cause.
So, okay, we've covered cheating teachers, sumo wrestlers, the KKK, real estate agents, drug dealers, the crime drop, parenting myths, baby names. It's quite a ride. What's the single thread pulling all this together? What does it all mean for you, the listener?
I think the biggest thing Freakonomics offers isn't necessarily a set of definitive answers. It's more like a toolkit, a way of thinking. It trains you to constantly look for the hidden incentive behind behavior, to question the easy answers, the conventional wisdom, to demand data.
Yeah, be skeptical and trust the numbers over anecdotes or gut feelings. The epilogue kind of sums it up with that 2 paths to Harvard idea, doesn't it? You can have the kid from the wealthy background, legacy admission maybe, and the kid who fought their way up from disadvantage, both get to Harvard, same outcome, but their paths, the incentives driving them were totally different.
Right. Data can show us probabilities, strong correlations, powerful trends, but it doesn't predict individual destiny with certainty. The world is messy, complex, so the final message is maybe. Be wary of anyone offering simple solutions or purely moralistic explanations for complex problems. Always dig deeper. Look for the economics underneath.
So we really encourage you, as you go about your week, try applying this Freakonomics lens. When you read a news story or hear an explanation for something, ask yourself, what are the incentives here? Is there an information gap? What does the actual data say, not just the story? Question the experts, especially if they seem to benefit from you not knowing everything. Trust the data.
If this conversation sparked your interest, definitely consider picking up the book Freakonomics. We'll put a link in the description. It's a really engaging read, written very accessibly.
It really will change how you look at the world around you. Okay, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks so much for tuning in to BookCast FM.
Bringing books to life, one cast at a time.